Cool. Yeah, I can take it. So the commons is really this concept that the common stack is trying to push of like people who are creating value in the nonprofit world are not being recognized for the value they're creating. You know, if you're running an environmental charity or a charity for social good, taking care of the less fortunate of society, you are creating value. But we don't have systems in place in our world to actually reward that value creation. And this is, of course, abundantly clear in the open source world. People who are developing in open source, they are creating a lot of value, and that value is often capitalized by people who can create value for individuals. But creating value for society, like open source development does, is not being recognized. And the Commons Swarm is specifically focused on making solutions for small organizations that want to create value for society at large without necessarily having customers. Normally, this kind of value creation has problems because of the free rider issue, where if you provide value for society, the people who support that value creation are effectively sacrificing because society at large gets all of the gains. However, blockchain technology has solved this problem, and bonding curves have allowed us to scale it down so that small groups that are creating value around a cause are actually able to create an economic system that rewards that value creation. And even more so, they are able to create an economy that captures, that can sort of quantify the future value output that these public goods focused organizations are creating. So the Common Swarm, originally the Common Swarm's design came out of the Common Stack and was implemented first by Luke and OneHive. It was originally called the Gardens model, and however, it has the Gardens model because for various reasons, which maybe I'll let Luke explain, has decided to let go of the bonding curve and really focus on a really cool dynamic issuance policy and with liquidity pools to provide liquidity, which definitely solves the problem in a much more simple way and in some ways more legally elegant. But the Common Swarm is bringing back the original vision, the Gardens classic, and we are going to keep the bonding curve idea alive so that smaller groups that don't want to get so complicated can actually apply this as well. I feel like that kind of covers the Common Swarm introduction. I guess the other thing is that that's worth saying is that dev team has a really nice core crew with Sem kind of being the leader, but also with Fabi, who's in this call, Gabby, and Vivi, and a bunch of other developers that have kind of come in to take on small little pieces and parts. And we are developing a full model with our first user being the token engineering commons. The goal is with the Common Swarm to work with the token engineering commons as a first user so we can solve their problems and be aware of what problems the actual users will have, and then apply this. I'll make it really easy for anybody to apply this model for their own cause. Luke, do you want to introduce yourself and the Gardens Swarm or Gardens Plan? Oh, actually, Luke, you're muted.
Oh, can you hear me now? Cool. Yeah. Hey, I'm Luke. I've been working on DAO stuff for a while and been really excited about all this stuff. The kind of gardens idea was heavily inspired by the Common Stack design because we really wanted to have a way for like networks of community currencies to like easily spin up like sub communities, the OneHive universe, and have them all connected and use Honey as like a reserve currency, and kind of like let people take advantage of tokenization and bypass a lot of the like the challenges in terms of like customizing and configuring one of these things or deploying one of these things, because it's actually really, really difficult. As we've seen, even with the token engineering commons and like when we launched OneHive on XDAI, like there's lots of challenges that you encounter, and there isn't really like a easy out of the box solution. So with the like one Hive model, we were like, let's try and simplify this so we can have an MVP. And we did that with the onehive.org interface and the Honey token, and it's gone really, really well. We've had like a lot of success with that. It's kind of spawned a really awesome, unique community. And we've had lots of people be really interested in trying to kind of replicate that or like do their own token in a similar model. And it's really difficult for us to even set it up, right? It requires like forking this like front end code. It requires like explaining a bunch of like configuration details. And like people generally are just getting stuck at that point. They're like, okay, I would love to do this, but it's just too much. And so we want to make it possible for people to use conviction voting as easily as possible, and kind of like replicate the success that we've had. And so we're extending the onehive.org interface with Gardens now to make it easier for people to just deploy their own from like a factory, use the existing interface. They don't have to fork anything. And we've decided that we don't want to integrate the bonding curve into that, at least initially, because it adds a whole bunch of complexity in terms of the UX and user flow that's different than the current model that we have. So it becomes like a support and like kind of product management challenge to like incorporate all of those features that are using a different backend essentially into the same front end. So the kind of paths have sort of diverged, and we've got now two use cases that may share a lot of code, but will have two kind of distinct code bases. And I'm really excited for that. And hopefully we'll have an update on like the Gardens roadmap soon. Gabby's not on the call here, but he's going to be leading the charge there. And I'm really excited for that.
Me too. One of the projects that I'm also affiliated with, Giveth, is very excited about using the Gardens model, because the Giveth economy, we believe, can be a relatively large economy. And so it makes a lot of sense to have a issuance model that then is governed by conviction voting. For smaller economies, like imagine a group of 5 people who live on a river that just want to keep the river clean, it's a little bit more difficult for them to have an accurate price discovery without the bonding curve. And that's just for the Common Stacks mission, it's very critical, because we believe that the next big thing is lots of small things, where people who are creating value can actually start capitalizing on that value creation instead of being exploited. I gave a talk at Denver, and I'll give another talk at the metagame, or what is it? I can't even remember the name of the
Metafest.
Metafest. Thank you. It's meta something. I always meta something. I'll give another talk about how effectively society is exploiting the altruists, and it's got to stop. And so our goal is, hey, let's make it easy for people to start small and regenerative economies. However, it's a long-term goal, and that's why we're very excited about starting with people like token engineers and providing effectively a regenerative engineering society, instead of like the IEEE or one of these groups where you have to pay membership dues, and then that organization provides value for their members and for the field of study at large. We want to create a tokenized engineering society for token engineers, where we have a cultural goal of advancing token engineering, and a Schelling point where all the token engineers can kind of talk about their problems and understand what's going on in the forefront of token engineering, kind of a community with an underpinning of, hey, we're going to provide grants for people who are advancing token engineering, and the people that participate in the hatch will have a lot of governance power over how this system evolves. Because the token engineers, they know MetaMask. They even know bonding curves. It really won't be much of a problem. The 5 people on a river, that might take a decade or 2 to get them around to this idea. Well, if you guys have any questions, I think this is the moment where we can start answering them. I guess I kind of have a question, Luke, about the next steps for gardens in OneHive, because I mean, I kind of know the answer, but I am so excited for disputable voting and disputable conviction voting. Would you be down to talk about the features that you guys are implementing?
Sure. Yeah. So I've kind of not really considered the OneHive model complete because we've been kind of hard at work getting the dispute resolution component kind of created. And that's, it's been a bit of a journey, but it's in QA on Rinkeby, and I'm writing the documentation for it, and I'm super stoked because we have kind of a system that we're using to create checks and balances on top of like our existing conviction voting and voting processes, which I think is really important for any of these things, because you need to be able to provide some sort of subjective constraints for participants. You need to be able to protect like minority participants from like being kind of overwhelmed by majority influence. And just like if you go through Ostrom's principles for managing a commons, for example, like dispute resolution is like a key tenet there. So essentially what we've done is created a like decentralized Oracle protocol that can be used to resolve subjective disputes. It's based on Aragon Court and inspired by Claros. And the key difference for us is that we've required Bright ID verification to limit how much stake an individual can put in the system. And that is really, really important, in my opinion, because it adds to the legitimacy. It makes it more of a like democratic, more decentralized process. And the process of essentially randomly selecting participants to provide a ruling and using sortition and appeals to get there is essentially wisdom of the crowds, and that doesn't work if you have a high concentration of stake in that system. Like if all of the signals are coming from like 2 or 3 people, the system breaks down. So we've used Bright ID as a way for us to make sure that there's a large, diverse set of people providing signals into the Oracle. And so what happens when somebody creates a proposal, whether it's a conviction proposal or like a decision proposal, they'll now have to put up a deposit when they create the vote, and that deposit will be at risk. They're basically putting that deposit and attesting that what they're proposing aligns with the kind of the covenant or the agreement that everybody that's participating in the system has sort of opted into or agreed to by participating in the system. And if somebody feels that a proposal has violated those terms or violated that like common agreement or covenant, they can challenge the proposal by putting up a deposit of their own. They can offer like a settlement offer to the person that put up the proposal. So if like somebody puts up a proposal that like has the wrong address, but you think it was totally like unintentional, like it shouldn't go through and it should be challenged, but like you're not really trying to like punish this person. You're just trying to say, hey, you screwed up. You can give them their deposit back or like take like a small amount. You don't have to take the whole thing. You can kind of be nice. But if somebody's being like really malicious, they're spamming things, you don't have to. And so once that settlement offer goes back to the person, they can choose to accept or reject it. If they accept it, then the proposal gets removed and life goes on as normal. What you would sort of expect, like somebody made a mistake, no big deal, they recreate the proposal. If they decide that they're like really, they're going to hold strong and double down on their position, they have to put up some additional collateral as fees to pay the people that are going to participate in this dispute resolution process. And then the dispute gets escalated to Celeste, which is our Oracle mechanism. And once that happens, we draft people that have staked in the system randomly to kind of do this first appeal round. It'll be a relatively small number of people, and they'll review both the kind of agreement that the dispute resolves around, as well as the like context of the like individual proposal. And they'll decide whether to allow that proposal or block it. And they have to make their decision in kind of a commit reveal fashion, so they can't tell anybody how they voted. And once that like gets resolved, you get like a tentative sort of ruling on whether this proposal will be allowed or blocked. If anybody disagrees with that ruling, because we've really only selected a handful of people, they can put up additional collateral as kind of a bet that this will be overturned in an appeal round. And if they do that and nobody takes the other side of that bet, the decision will be flipped. And we just assume that like if nobody's willing to take the other side of the bet, it's probably right. If somebody does, then it escalates to a larger group. And so we've got this kind of incentivized structure to draw the attention of this like crowd of people that are participating in the system to these disputes and analyze them. And as you go further and further up this tree, and eventually you select all of the participants, everybody's got a little bit more skin in the game because these dispute fees have escalated. You're potentially going to get slashed, and so you spend more time reviewing and analyzing and making sure that the actual like outcome is something that people are going to be happy with. And that's how it works. So we've got like a system that tries to keep things really, really low cost initially, like avoids escalating to the dispute process. But when necessary, it has everybody get involved and kind of democratically kind of decide how the system should move forward.
Celeste is so cool. It's so we have in the TEC there, and it's kind of a common stack project. We have a Gravity working group that's kind of focused on internal conflict transformation. You could say conflict resolution or conflict management, but we believe that conflicts are actually natural and a fantastic opportunity to improve. And so we have this internal group that tries to resolve disputes, but sometimes disputes can't be resolved internally. And so to have an external dispute resolution organization, DROs, as like the Austrians and the libertarians often talk about. I mean, I haven't actually seen this kind of independent DROs. There's Claros and really Celeste now. Maybe Aragon Court if that ever kicks up again. But this is a pretty serious project. So I also think that disputable voting, is Celeste, because that's the disputable part, but delegation being integrated in, the wait for quiet, these are also two really critical features that I'm so excited to see finally implemented. These are things that we wanted to do with the DAO back in 2016. In fact, Jordi implemented delegation for the DAO, but then we haven't had it this really in Aragon this entire time. It's amazing. And finally it's here. And then wait for quiet was an idea from Dominic Williams who started Definity. And now it's finally here. We can finally use it. So that's those are super cool features. Well, there was another question too. Does the Okay, so does the Common Stack plan to launch other commons after the TEC, and which ones? I can be really brief on this question, and then we can go to the YouTube question. But the Common Stack does not necessarily have a target of what kind of commons to launch after the TEC. The goal is the Common Stack is taking the opportunity of the TEC to really study our design pattern, and our focus is more on the cultural side than actually the technical side. I mean, of course, we're going to do as much token engineering as we can to make sure that this system works out. But we believe that the real challenge that needs to be solved first is how do we actually get communities to, coordinate with this protocol? Like, how do people work with the resources? How do people work with the protocol? And really understanding that interplay between these three important pieces, and that's all cultural. So we're doing a lot of work on the cultural side and building a cultural playbook for how to interact alongside the technical playbook. And we're going to release that once we have the case study done with the TEC and have really analyzed what we did well and what we could have done better. We'll release that and let people decide what ones they want to use, and then support them in that effort. It's not our goal necessarily for even the next year to try to do another field test. We want to do this one. We consider Token Engineering Commons the first field test of our iteration 0 commons, with a focus on the cultural build. And then we'll put that out there, let other people use the iteration 0 of the common stack design, and then watch, look, gather data, see what other people, what other communities want to use it, and understand how their cultural design had to fit their community, whereas this cultural design has to fit the token engineering community. And hopefully there'll be 20, 30, 40 different commons that we can gather data from. And then we'll actually try to do another field test with another iteration of the design. And we will actually have the trusted seed decide what the focus of the next field test will be. However, that will be a long ways away. Chewy, did you want to tell us the YouTube question?
As far as like OneHive is concerned, I don't think there's any intention to adopt a bonding curve rather than the issuance model. We wouldn't really have like a reserve currency other than honey. Honey is money. Yeah, so I don't think there's any plans on that front. There is plans on the garden side to allow people to bring their own token, and it's unclear whether we'll use the bonding curve in like a 1-to-1 capacity or create a new contract for that. Yeah, no plans right now to attach a bonding curve to the honey token.
Yeah, and on the token engineering commons side, it will be there's kind of this, to initialize the bonding curve, it's really important that we have people with skin in the game. So we have 2-step launch. This also supports a legal strategy around initializing these bonding curves, where we start with a closed launch where only token engineers and people that have been curated to not be speculatively focused, like they're not focused on only making profits. They actually want to create value and advance token engineering. So we have a closed hatch where it's not that closed. You just have to be a member of the trusted seed to participate. And then people will put money in, and effectively you start with a Moloch DAO. It's a dandelion DAO in the Aragon scene, but the funds will come into a DAO that then votes on upgrading to a bonding curve and a conviction voting DAO that they design. So it's this 2-step launch, and there at the beginning there's issuance because people send money into the hatch, which is kind of the initial like collection pot where we throw in the funds and we send in wrapped XDAI into the hatch. And then at the end of the hatch period, the amount of time that people have to send money into that collection pot, that will initialize the TEC hatch DAO, and that DAO will then vote to upgrade into a commons. And in that, so we have this issuance, but it's really this just collection pot that then will initialize a bonding curve, and that's when the real fun begins. And it's really important to have this bulk initialization of a bonding curve. Otherwise, it feels weird. But we want to make sure that the people who have skin in the game get to actually design their own economy. We're trying to be the first organization ever really in crypto that I know of where it's your economy, your choice, where the specific parameters are designed by the community as opposed to a couple of devs getting in the room, kind of figuring it out. I mean, it takes a lot of research and understanding to understand how to design these things. So that's why it's very rarely done. But because our community is full of token engineers, we're in a very privileged position where we can actually do kind of wisdom of the crowd economic design. It takes a lot of work, of course, but we're going for it. It'll be fun. So yeah, the TEC will and all commons will not have a real issuance model. They'll all have a bonding curve issuance model. Well, here's a question for you, Luke, really. How can Celeste agreements be changed by a DAO after some time has passed?
So the agreement is like stored on IPFS and kind of documented as like an Aragon app. There's a bunch of technical jargon there that I guess it gets deep, and I would direct you to the documentation that I've yet to write. But it is possible via like a decision vote to kind of modify the agreement and like change permissions. However, we are not really intending to kind of change, like that's a process we'll probably like adapt over time, but we're not really like aiming to make a lot of changes to the like One Hive agreement or agreements in general, just because the goal for us is to minimize like kind of governance and decision making as much as possible. So in our situation, the covenant is this kind of like you can think of it as sort of the Constitution, and you just don't want to amend the Constitution very often on a day-to-day basis. And instead, we want to like maybe change the interpretation over time as like precedents are set, but not the actual document itself, because they're like high-level values that are associated with the community that like if these are changing, you kind of have a problem because you're changing the expectations for everybody involved.
And One Hive has a very generalized covenant with a very open-ended system, right? Like it's not nearly very.
This isn't like a set of rules or laws or anything like that. It's very much like a high-level like value statement. We actually based it off of the open source contributor covenant, if you're familiar with that, and it's basically like setting values-based expectations for how people interact with each other. And making sure it's an inclusive and like safe sort of space for people to get involved and participate. And kind of beyond that, it's like very, very general.
Yeah. Whereas for the token engineering commons and the commons economies that we want to start, they're probably going to have agreements that are very focused. Like token engineering commons is advancing token engineering. And maybe occasionally we will want to vote to amend that, to define it a little bit. Like precedents will be set, but then maybe precedents get set in a direction we don't want. And because it's a smaller group and a more focused effort, that will be something that'll be more likely.
It's definitely possible to upgrade these over time. I'm just like, it's definitely a sensitive thing to upgrade, you know? Even though these are like social contracts, they're subjective sort of language. I would say that they're just as important, I would say, as some of these like underlying like smart contracts and parameterizations in terms of how these things work. A lot of people really underestimate the social side, and I know and really appreciate that about like Common Stack and the Common Swarm, focusing on cultural builds and cultural interactions that relate to these things, because otherwise you just have a set of smart contracts that are going to sit there forever on a blockchain and nobody's going to care about them.
Totally. Well, Jess asks, what are the requirements to become a juror?
So for Celeste, we do not have jurors. We're moving away from all of the like legal language around a court. This is not a court. It's a decentralized Oracle protocol that just happens to resolve disputes. And the disputes are not legal disputes. This is not like intended to be modeled after a court at all. So no jurors. We're calling people that participate in the protocol and stake keepers. And in order to become a keeper, you'll have to be Bright ID verified. because that's how we ensure that people can't create multiple accounts and kind of get around the stake limit restriction. And then you'll have to stake honey in the protocol, and the likelihood that you'll get selected to resolve a dispute and participate is based on your proportional amount of stake in the system. And that's also related to the staking, the baseline staking rewards that we'll fund from the common pool to incentivize participation. Yeah, so one other thing on that, even though we have these disputes, we're thinking of it kind of around this idea of optimistic games. So games where people perform or propose something on chain, and we assume that what they propose optimistically is going to kind of go through and be allowed unless somebody challenges or disputes that. And so this is, again, not legal disputes. It's moderating these optimistic games that can be created on chain. And these governance related ones related to voting that we've started with as one example. But we can also use conviction voting as just a curated list of entries, for example. And that's another example of an optimistic game. We've got a cool project planned for doing canonical sets of NFTs using a similar mechanism. So we want this to be sort of a fun social community moderation tool and an Oracle service, and not be seen as a legal system, even though there are parallels.
Well, kind of on the
you cut out for me, Griff.
Well, there's a question for you, Luke. And Septimus is asking, how is Celeste protecting small groups' opinions?
Gotcha. So there's a couple things here. One is that we have this bright ID limitation on how much you can stake. So it's a hybrid proof of stake, proof of humanity kind of approach to being eligible to participate. The proof of stake component is there because we want to ensure that people have some incentive to act in a predictable fashion, because they might get slashed or they might earn rewards, and they need to have some skin in the game. But the amount of skin in the game that an individual is allowed to have is limited. So if you're a whale and you want to put all your weight and control the system, you very quickly are going to hit that limiter, and other people can participate and ensure that your limited stake that you're allowed to put in is diffused among the rest of the system. So it does use stake, but because it's limited, it's much more democratic, and we would expect a relatively broad base for these signals to come in. So that's the first piece. In terms of the system itself, has a limiter on stake, and that kind of prevents whales, even if they have a whole bunch of the token or capital in general, from having a disproportionately large influence on the system itself. And then in the case of these governance games that we're using, we're using conviction voting to allocate resources from the common pool. And that's purely on a proof of stake sort of basis, where if you have more honey, you have more influence over where resources go in the one Hive system. And it's sort of proportional representation in that respect. But with Celeste, we're allowed to, or we can create this covenant that says these are the types of proposals that are acceptable. And if a whale comes in and says, I just want to send all of the common pool to myself, and I'm just going to keep creating proposals and passing them because I've got so much stake that I can just do that and abuse the system. Now those can be disputed in Celeste, And the whales, again, are prevented from having a disproportional influence in Celeste. And so the Celeste tool can be used to sort of block or dispute proposals that should be seen as invalid or kind of abusive on the commons, even if like you have a whale that has enough support to unilaterally pass proposals via conviction voting. So in that sense, it gives us a way to put a check on the power of whales. And in a more broad sense, even if we're not talking about resource allocation, and this might be an even more important case, especially if you're talking about people being able to do majority votes in order to upgrade the covenant or upgrade the smart contracts, being able to provide like a subjective agreement upfront saying like, these are the things that are acceptable or unacceptable. These are the conditions where they might be acceptable is really important, because as a minority participant in this system, if you don't have a decisive vote in these things, you're kind of having to trust that the system is going to act in a certain way. And without something like Celeste, there's no like subjective constraints put on the system or the power of whales. And so you're actually just trusting the whales that have a decisive stake in the system to act in a predictable fashion that you're okay with, and not kind of like rug you or like change the system in a way that like you wouldn't agree with. So it provides a really nice way to kind of create subjective constraints that put checks on the power of like whales or people that have decisive stake in some of these governance systems more generally. He's on mute still.
We have another question regarding Celeste, and Jessica is asking, what are the selection criteria for keepers? Is it based on the amount of honey holdings, or who chooses the keepers? I think it's already been answered, but...
Yeah, I mean, really quickly, it's stake-based sortition. So when you stake, you put honey into the system, and you become eligible to be called upon to sort of resolve these disputes as a keeper. And it's a random process when a dispute occurs to select a certain subset of the population of keepers. So we use a relatively complicated term system to create our source of entropy, combining like the block hash of a previous term in order to create the random seed for disputes that are called in the next term. Because we're not like doing like a lottery or anything like this, and you have to be like participants in the system and staked and bright ID verified, we're not too worried about the manipulation of entropy by like block producers or anything like that. So it's a pseudo random process, but proportionally you would expect that you'll get selected roughly proportional to the amount of stake that you're putting into the system.
And then Zeptimus is asking, if some token engineering commons conflict goes through disputable voting, how do we know the keepers will know about the issue? And I guess I would preface with most conflicts won't go through disputable voting. That really the Celeste is, so we're only going to necessarily apply it to the actual conviction voting proposals or actual disputable voting proposals that would be against the covenant or would be challenged as like, this is not favorable by the community, right?
Yeah, and to add to that, like the intention here would be that people try and resolve disputes at the like most local level possible, and that's why we have this like settlement workflow. In general, we don't expect people to use like Celeste or the dispute resolution process as a way to make decisions or decide on things of a technical nature. It's clearly when two people within like the community have a clear disagreement, and they're going to lay out their case for like why they think this should be allowed or blocked to the participants. So the participants are going to be able to read the covenant or the agreement, and it's going to like lay out kind of how things should be interpreted, and that's going to give them sort of the intention of the community. And then they're going to see like the kind of response from the people that are like initiating the dispute, saying like, this is why I think it should be interpreted this way. And at that point, they're just sort of making a case, and they're appealing to sort of a broad, decentralized, democratic group of people to evaluate in a more common sense way. But these participants are not like expertise. They're not token engineers. They're not experts. They're like bright ID participants that are signing up and getting drafted for jury duty, essentially. So they're not necessarily going to have really, really deep expertise. And
the context would be, hey, someone made a conviction voting proposal, let's say, to fund an ICO or something like that, right? And someone would be like, dude, that ICO is a scam and it has nothing to do with token engineering. I challenge this, you know, and then the person's like, yeah, it does have to do with token engineering and it's important. And I will meet your challenge. We should dispute this. Let's bring this to the court, or sorry, to the keepers. Let's bring this to the keepers. And then both of them would have an opportunity to submit information, right, to the keepers, like for more context.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing is, people will be discussing this in the open in like Discord servers, and like it won't even just be the people that are discussing it, but like, or that are including it. Like it's an open conversation at that point. Like it's a public discourse on a forum, effectively, in terms of how to proceed, and anybody can kind of weigh in. The keepers can't provably reveal like what they're voting for. And if they do, somebody can like submit their like signature and slash them. But they can talk. They can talk with the community. They can ask for clarifying questions. This isn't like it goes into this black box and you get like an answer back. It's like it goes into this process, and while it's in that process, there's an open discussion in terms of like figuring out how people can respond.
Chewy, did you have more questions from YouTube?
I have another great question from Jessica, and she's asking, when are you expecting to finish initial designs? Are you planning to model the system before or after the deployment?
Is this a question about Celeste or in general about the commons?
Yeah, I think it's related to. I think it's related to the commons.
Oh, to the commons. Well, for us, we're modeling the system now. We're using basic CAD models. The Common Stack has been modeling the system for 2 years, basically, like really trying to figure out the pros and cons of different things, but nothing matters till it's in the wild, really. You know, we can make all the assumptions that we want, but the data doesn't back it up because there is no data. So our goal is to actually launch one of these things, and we're going to do basic CAD models. In fact, maybe I can share my screen really quick and show how we're voting. And this is related to what Bagsy is asking too, because I think this is pretty cool. We have this very basic, oh no, it's not loaded. I'll have to, it'll take a second to load, probably actually a couple minutes. But we're doing some basic modeling of this system so that people can decide correctly what parameters they want to choose. Because as Luke said, one of the big problems with the bonding curve and this kind of system is it gets really complex. There's a lot of moving parts, and you can't just decide one parameter at a time because all the parameters actually influence each other. So it's important to have the outcomes there. So we're creating this dashboard, and this is like probably an ugly first version. We're going to create a much better version. And it's also for the test numbers. So it's like the maximum raise is $1,000 because this would be for a test DAO, not the actual Token Engineering Commons hatch DAO. But you can see that we can start changing some of these really crazy parameters and start to see how they will impact the overall system. So and then these things will actually change. So like you can add these. Yeah, as you can see, it's finally starting to change here. But yeah, so we're going to design, we have these dashboards that will kind of show like, okay, let's say you have support required at, 80%. What does it take to actually pass a proposal now, and this graph will be a graphical representation of this. So we're creating some basic CAD models to design the system and help people parameterize the system as a community. And we, of course, also have the Common Simulator, which is super cool, which has real CAD models of the system, agent-based CAD models of the system in the back end. So you can go to sim.commonstack.org, sim.commonstack.org, and you can play the Common Simulator and actually understand like how we're designing the system, and it has a real agent-based model behind it that is running. And I just want to roll that into the question that Bagsy M3 asks, which is there a quadratic way that we can separate wealth from power and authority? And what we're doing with quadratic voting, these things always require identity verification. So that makes things somewhat challenging. There's Bright ID as an option. The TE Commons and the Common Stack has a centralized identity verification strategy where people apply to be a member of the trusted seed. And then we look at their application, we make sure they're, this is the first time they've applied, or and then accept their application or not. If they're like civil attacking the system, we make sure they're a real human. The old-fashioned way, we look them up on social media and check that someone knows them. If they don't have a lot of data that we can judge, maybe we'll accept them and give them a low max trust score. If we can find out who they are and it's very clear that they're a very trustworthy individual, we raise their max trust score, and that's kind of how we manage it. But it's very interesting, this separating wealth from power or authority, a concept. And I think there are certain cases where there is a direct correlation between wealth and skin in the game. If, for instance, if you're governing a pot of funds and one person puts in $20, another person puts in $20,000, the person who put in $20,000 has more skin in the game. And they should have more governance rights over that pot of funds. If you're choosing whether or not gay marriage should be legal, then everyone has unique power. It's a different decision matrix with different requirements. However, in every situation, I really believe that unique perspective adds value. So it's good to have that in. And when we're choosing parameters as a community within the Token Engineering Commons and what we've designed with the Common Stack for all commons is this a quadratic voting method where people with more tokens have more skin in the game, but with quadratic voting, that's in some ways like metered. You have more skin in the game, so you should have more power, but also unique perspectives have value. So let's measure this power quadratically so people with less skin in the game, but still a unique perspective, have a lot to say. Do you have anything on that, Luke?
Sure. Yeah. I think it's a super interesting, interesting topic because there's so many different mechanisms that we have and approaches to solve some of these problems, and applying like a quadratic scaling. If you have like Sybil resistance, can be like kind of a nice smooth way to kind of limit or like balance kind of that dynamic. We didn't do that with Celeste because it complicated the implementation significantly. And our like main goal was we wanted to ensure that the like wisdom of the crowd effect didn't get crowded out by stake. And I think we were able to kind of accomplish that with just having like a simple like limiter and like maximum stake. We've also considered doing things like quadratic conviction voting, which would be really, really interesting. But we haven't implemented that yet. And part of the reason we haven't is because we've used Bright ID as sort of a security assumption in Celeste. And Celeste can only block actions. It can't like empty funds from the common pool. Whereas if we implement quadratic conviction voting and there's an issue with the like Bright ID process, and it's easier to get verified accounts, or like or it's really hard to get Bright ID verified, then it like makes it difficult to participate in that system. And so like beyond the just like skin in the game argument in terms of participating in conviction voting, there was also like a technical argument of like balancing where you want to make security assumptions around Sybil resistance. So we haven't done that yet, but it would be interesting. I also really like the idea of using quadratic conviction voting just for the negative voting, because people want to add like the ability to downstake on proposals, which changes the dynamics a lot and would require modeling, but could be really interesting if you can quadratically downvote, but you still have like linear like upvoting, because then you're kind of balancing the negative effects of downvoting by making it more of a democratic process. But there's like so many cool things that we can go down in that space. Like we're iterating and trying these things out, but the design space is still like unexplored in a lot of areas.
Yeah, one of the cool things about conviction voting is it integrates time into the equation, so that in some ways we can avoid some of the Sybil requirements while still giving the community a way to understand what's going to happen and the opportunity to exit if they don't like it. So just by giving people time before a decision passes, then now you have a system where if someone does come in, and especially in the common swarms approach with a bonding curve, if someone comes in, buys a lot of tokens, and then tries to pass a proposal, there'll be it will probably take time. And even if that proposal is in agreement with the covenant, but it's not, and so the Celeste would say this is a valid proposal, the community will have some time to say, oh, you know what, this proposal is a bad idea, we're going to exit. And the person who bought a lot of tokens, well, they lose value when people exit, because the bonding curve will deterministically lower the price as people leave. So they put in a lot of money and raise the price for everyone. And now if people don't like this person's decision, they have time to actually exit and start a community where that whale isn't there, and restart the system again. So actually, Jess has a really interesting question. I'd like to hear the answer too. Is there a plan to do any modeling of Celeste, or would you, are you going to implement first and then model later, or is there no plan for model?
Yeah, I mean, I would have loved to have modeled all of Celeste first, and I think like we probably would have like learned a bunch of stuff and maybe even implemented things differently. But we have an implementation, and we have a pressing need, and we're pretty confident that like the implementation can like improve the status quo for us. So we're implementing first, and it's like in QA, and we'll kind of see the like major upgrade to the like Honey system relatively soon. But it's not really like by a conscious decision to like implement first and model later. It would definitely have been better to model first in many regards. I think one of the challenges is that there's like relatively scarce set of people that can do modeling and are interested in doing modeling and have the time to do modeling, and it's all harder to find funding to do modeling. And so it's often like if you're building and implementing, there's like you can move much faster because there isn't a bottleneck there. But I would really love to see additional modeling for the like One Hive system as a whole. We want to do computer-aided governance, and we have like our initial model. As we upgrade to the Celeste system, we may try and create a new model or extend some of these existing models and augment it with data over time. Like I think that like that should be an ongoing process. We should be continuously modeling and improving our models of these systems, and then incorporating data and using that data to kind of impact decision making.
And of course, this is why the Common Stack is so excited to partner with the token engineering community, so that we can grow a larger community of people who can do this modeling and this design validation, and make it easier, build more examples that can be forked. You know, it's actually really easy to write smart contract systems, because there's Open Zeppelin, and there's a whole community of smart contract audits. You know, it's hard to get a smart contract audit now, but when we did the DAO, that industry didn't exist. There were no smart contract audits, right? So, you know, it took time and a lot of needs and understanding to develop that system. And with the Token Engineering Commons, hopefully we can start making it easy for engineers that want to implement to be like, well, it's a no-brainer. Of course we go get a design validation audit with these token engineer systems that exist all over the place. Why wouldn't we? And just pay for someone who's got expertise and there's a market for it. But as you said, that doesn't exist yet. So hopefully the Token Engineering Commons, though, will change that. Chewy, are there any more questions up there?
Yeah, we have one last question from Jessica. Thank you very much, Jessica, by the way. You've made some great questions today. And so we're going to have this last question, and after this, we got to wrap this up. She's asking, how do we continue to balance automating or permissionless systems with keeping them human while maintaining the culture of them? What lessons have you learned in OneHive so far about this?
I found both from OneHive and just generally in the DAO space in my past experience that like automation is not necessarily like incompatible with like human influence. And one of the things that I'm really excited about with conviction voting in particular is that you get like you get to take signals from humans and they can influence the system, this like automated system, without having to, like, you can still minimize human governance and like decision making. And we try and do that because like it doesn't necessarily scale well, and you get like a lot of like challenges making these discrete decisions, because as soon as you make a discrete decision that's logically centralized, you've disenfranchised, or not really disenfranchised, but like if you've got majority rule, half of the people are going to be unhappy all of the time, essentially. Whereas with conviction voting, we've got like proportional representation and approval voting, and individuals can signal and shift the direction of the like whole and influence it. But it can be a largely autonomous kind of system that responds to these inputs. So I think that like finding that balance for these systems where humans influence the system and benefit from the system, but the system scales because it's automated and has all of these like encoded things, opens up a lot of new possibilities for us. And I think that's the power of DAOs, as the power of blockchains and smart contracts, is as these like coordination tools and coordination protocols, so that you can take inputs from lots of different signals. And I don't think this is new. Like, this isn't novel necessarily. Proof of work does the same thing, even though it's people running computers and the computers are performing complex math problems. Is largely a protocol for coordination and human coordination, essentially, because you've created a system where miners do things and they profit from it, and they got an incentive not to burn the house down because their like investment goes out the window. All of these like cool blockchain things that we're seeing kind of boil down to some pattern that looks something like that. But with conviction voting, we're taking a much more like subjective kind of input to that, a much more like involved like human side. Same with Celeste, we're involving inputs directly from humans as opposed to mostly coming from machines solving math problems or coordinating blocks or something like that. But I think it's really exciting that we're seeing that.
Yeah, I would just add scaling horizontally. You know, sometimes decisions. I like the colony approach, where like decisions are happening in small groups of experts that you know are studying these efforts. And I think One Hive has done this with swarms, where there's different swarms and they're making lots of decisions, but then being checked by the larger group, and they're held accountable to the community at large through the conviction voting process. But decisions are happening in the swarm, and not everyone has to care about every decision. And breaking it out like that, and the TEC is doing that with working groups. You know, where there's like specific working groups. There's a legal working group, and they make lots of small decisions, and then they present a full plan, and then everyone votes on it, and they say, yeah, you know what? We want to have the TEC be a non-legal entity so it can evolve however it wants, but we want to protect the members, so we use the trusted seed. What do you guys think? And then there's a forum vote, and we agree. And I think this is the way you have you scale horizontally. You have small groups who really care about this decision making scene, but they're held accountable to the larger group. Well, I guess, Chewy, did you want to give us an outro?
Yeah. Well, thanks to everybody for being here. There was just this was a great event, and thanks for attending. Yeah, this community is the one that makes all of this possible. So thank you very much. Thanks also Fabi and Sam for supporting us in the Telegram group. And yeah, hope to see you guys soon in another One Hive AMA. Thanks all for attending, and yeah, you guys have a good day.
Bye, guys. Thanks.